This episode of The Boardwalk was recorded prior to the August 26 suicide attack at the Abbey Gate at Hamid Karzai International Airport. In the past 2 weeks, we've watched chaos unfold as Americans and our NATO and Afghan allies attempt to reach Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul to escape the Taliban regime. Since the end of July, the United States has evacuated over 90,000 people, most of them Afghans and their families. Upon arriving to the United States, our Afghan friends will be starting over, leaving their entire world behind, and they're going to need our assistance when they get here. World Relief is an international nonprofit that helps with refugee resettlement. They help newly arrived refugees with finding temporary and in some cases permanent housing accommodations, as well as basic living requirements and furniture. They help with applying for workers' visas, social security cards, photo IDs, and registering children for school, as well as other legal services that may become necessary. There are even summer camps designed to help refugee children become more comfortable in their new country. World Relief operates in 17 cities across 10 states, including Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, and Baltimore. And along with several other veteran-ran podcasts and Instagram pages, we are partnering with World Relief Seattle to help support those Afghans who supported us. Spearheaded by the Panjshir podcast and Memories of Kandahar Instagram page, we are selling t-shirts to raise money for World Relief Seattle's mission. All proceeds minus costs will go directly to World Relief Seattle as they work to help our Afghan friends and co-workers who have risked their lives and the lives of their families to help America and our NATO partners get settled in America. The link to the shirts can be found in the show description and in our Instagram bio. You can also donate directly to World Relief or World Relief Seattle, and we will be providing those links on our Instagram page as well as in the show notes. We made a promise to those that helped us that we would help them. And this is how we can help fulfill that promise. Welcome to the Boardwalk.
Welcome to the Boardwalk Podcast. This week we will be talking about northern Afghanistan and some of the key figures and players up there. And we want to give you guys a little bit of a history on the Mujahideen, a term that you've been hearing a lot in the news lately, but to some degree of success from the American news outlets. They tend to confuse the Mujahideen with the Taliban, and they use that word and they don't know what it means in the famous Princess Bride meme. So we kind of want to talk a little bit about that. So let's talk about the Mujahideen, guys. So fighters. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the Mujahideen is not the Taliban. I have seen checkmarked Twitter pages. Oh, by the way, we're on Twitter now at the Boardwalk Pod. We'll get into that later on. But like trying to follow everything that's going on Twitter, and I'm seeing like news agencies, and they're talking about the Taliban and like their funding from the U.S. during the Soviet-Afghan War. Like we've covered this on our podcast. They were created in the 90s after all that when there was a power vacuum from Pakistan. We did create the Mujahideen. Well, we armed the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen were created out of anti-communist uprising, really. And that's where we start this episode. In the 70s, there were two coups in Afghanistan. The second coup for sure the first coup also brought in a communist government, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. And that existed until the end of the Soviet-Afghan War. That was in 73. In 78, there was another coup. Basically, the Soviets didn't like who the president of Afghanistan was, and I can't remember his name. It starts with a K. So they got rid of him, and they installed another guy. And then you eventually had this uprising of people from throughout the country. And it wasn't just one ethnic group or another. It was a lot of people, really outside the major cities. And that's where we first saw the creation of these Uzbek and Tajik and Pashtun militias. And so if you've seen Charlie Wilson's War, you kind of have an idea of what happened. Is we worked with Pakistan to help fund these guys in their fight against the Soviets, mostly because it was the Cold War, and if we could piss the Soviets off and kill a lot of them in the process, well, why wouldn't we do that? Another big reason, if you're familiar with Russia's interest in Afghanistan, they've been there several times. Afghanistan, like we've talked about, just kind of sits there in the middle of some pretty valuable trade routes. And so the Soviets are trying to get in. so they can get down to ports in Pakistan, create some influence. That's why they backed the communist governments of Afghanistan up through the 80s. Yeah, it really starts in 79 when the Mujahideens trying to fight the Soviets and they just don't have the weapons. And then eventually a drunken, philandering congressman from Texas gets together with Pakistan and Julia Roberts, and ultimately he begins the process of funding and arming the Mujahideen to the point that they eventually defeat the Soviets in 89. There's a lot of stuff in there that we're going to talk about, though.
And that doesn't give a whole lot of credence to the Mujahideen themselves, particularly Ahmad Shah Massoud's Mujahideen, who were doing very well at fighting the Soviets. But you kind of have to think like when the Soviet government or this communist government took over, not the Soviet government, but basically a proxy for the Soviet government, took over Afghanistan. You have this hatred in outside of the major urban centers for this new communism, I suppose, right? So much like Western civilization at the time, right, was seen as very evil. I mean, women didn't have to cover up; they could be educated. All this other stuff that we kind of see as hallmarks of Western democracy. Well, I mean, it's certainly not Western, but communism kind of brought those same ideals to Afghanistan, and of course, there's a lot of pushback from that. So that's where a lot of this fight back comes from. It's not a necessarily fighting because they don't like communism. They didn't like any of these brand new Western ways that communism was, changing their country. So that's kind of where this uprising started. But like Zach said, if you can provide material support to a group against the Soviet Union, then you're going to in the 1970s and 80s. So it's like even though we'd probably agree more with people in the urban centers of Kabul at the time, well, screw them. We got weapons for the guys that hate them. So that's kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah, it was that era that you have that real feel good picture that everyone likes to likes to point out of like, oh, Afghanistan back in the day before for the 20 wars that just ravaged it for the last 50 years. You have that picture in Kabul of the westernized women walking around seeming to just enjoy life and everything's fine, and that wouldn't last.
And that was only for the urban centers. I mean,
Yeah.
the rural Afghanistan, whether it's under Jaroa, whether it's under President Ghani, whether it's under the Taliban or the Soviet Union or the Communist Party of Afghanistan. I mean, it's the same pretty much throughout history, at least for the past 19th and 20th centuries. It's pretty much the exact same. So it's mainly urban centers where we're talking about all these changes.
So the Soviets, the Soviets did the exact opposite of what we did when we went to Afghanistan. They got to Afghanistan, realized that they had the urban areas, and just started mowing down people in the rural areas. That's how they were going to, garner their support, was by killing the opposition. And so you'll notice that when you see these pictures of Afghan refugees from back during the Soviet-Afghan War, they're dressed very similar to how you see Afghans dressed now, because those were the more conservative, traditionalist, Pashtunwali abiding Afghans who didn't really need a Taliban to show up to administer their interpretation of Islamic dress codes and things like that. And with that, it really the Soviet-Afghan War introduces us to three figures that I can think of, at least off the top, actually four off the top of my head. Uh, Abdul Rashid Dostum, who's the Uzbek warlord, also known as the Marshal of the Afghan military, which I guess is the equivalent of a general of the army, is kind of what he was prior to August 15th. You had Abdul Rashid Dostum he was up in Sheberghan / Mazar-e Sharif, Jowzjan, and Balkh. You had Ahmad Shah Massoud from Panjshir. We're going to talk about him in a little more depth here in a minute. And you had Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who I learned is from Kunduz. I didn't know that.
I didn't either until you just said it.
Yeah. Well, he cared so much about Eastern Afghanistan, I figured that's where he was from. Those are really the three people that came out of this. And the link between Dostum and Massoud, or not Dostum and Massoud, between Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Massoud was Bernardudin Rabbani. who would eventually become the president of Afghanistan in 1992. Uh, he was the teacher for Ahmad Shah Massoud and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar at Kabul University. They were both engineering students together, born in the same year, went to school at the same time. And they created Hezb Islami, like the Party of Islam or the Group of Islam. And basically, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar became a lot more traditional. I don't know how you want to. He became an extremist. He became ultimately what like a Taliban sect was. It wasn't just about expelling foreigners, right? You know, it was about expelling foreigners and instilling this correct and righteous version of Islam. And Rabbani kind of, he distanced himself from Gulbuddin because even though Rabbani himself, like Rabbani brought in the religious police when he was president. People forget that. Like that was him that did that, not the Taliban. He was still a relatively moderate Muslim, and so was Massoud. And so that's where the falling out comes from. And ultimately, we backed all three of those individuals, but we gave Gulbuddin a lot more support than Massoud or Dostum.
Yeah, and that's interesting that we gave Hekmatyar all that money because, like you said, he was the more radical. But I don't think we really had an idea of radical Islam at the time when Charlie Wilson was securing his funding. I don't think we understood what. I don't think we do now. I don't think we really understand it now. But I think there was certainly a lapse in judgment or a lapse in knowledge at the time for giving money.
So that's a great kind of a segue into the next thing about why we backed Gulbuddin more than somebody like Ahmad Shah Massoud. Well, let's start with his story, right? So he was born in 1953 in Azrak in Panjshir. It was then a district of Parwan province, but the district, like Panjwai, is the size of the entire province of Parwan. It would eventually become its own province in 2004. He's an ethnic Tajik. He's the son of an Afghan army colonel who was stationed in Kabul. He moved to Herat and then ultimately moved to Kabul. He spent the rest of his time there, gets to Kabul University, and he joins the Hezb Islami and then ultimately becomes a Mujahideen commander. And he's probably the most famous Mujahideen commander. If you see pictures of anywhere in Panjshir, to include the vehicles, his face is fucking everywhere. We've seen some of the video of the new resistance guys driving through Panjshir, and on their cars, like the you can get on the back of your car like a picture kind of thrown on there, but you can still see through it. They got that shit on the front of their car, and it's Massoud's face. The guy's everywhere. He was a brilliant tactician. He was a friend to the West. One of the big reason why we were hesitant to back him is because Ahmad Shah Massoud, or Ahmad Shah Massoud, however you want to pronounce it. I've heard apparently both's acceptable. He was a well-read individual. He read Mao, he read Che. He read about these other types of commanders or these leaders. And even though he was openly anti-communist, there was a concern that ultimately he was too smart. And I think it's a really stupid thing. We still backed him, right? But you're right, Kyle, because we didn't understand enough about the area. We, I think, allowed Pakistan to kind of dictate where that funding went to. And so they went with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the Pashtun Sunni extremist, who's going to be more in line with what Pakistan wants. And then Massoud, he was favored by India. Well, that's a no-go for Pakistan. Right? Pakistan and India absolutely hate each other, and we'll get into that when we talk about Twitter later on. Right? So you had Massoud, who was leading his Tajik fighters in Panjshir, which was never infiltrated by the Soviets. He was, like I said, great commander, well-read. He spoke French, Dari, Pashto, Urdu, and he could read English, which is like 3.5 more languages than I know. And, he gets credit because he ultimately unites all of the non-Taliban forces in the late 90s. That's where he gets his national hero or hero of the nation status. Although I have a feeling that that's going to be rescinded here shortly.
Yeah, I would imagine the Taliban are not going to view him as a hero of Afghanistan in the Islamic Emirates. So.
No.
I'd be interested to see. This might be the last time that people are able to sort of in protest celebrate Ahmad Shah Massoud Day on September 9th. I mean, it's coming up, and we've seen some protests already.
Yeah.
So, be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. So the Soviet Afghan War and our involvement with it, like I said, if you've seen Charlie Wilson's War, that is like 40% of it, right? There's a whole lot more to it. Obviously, the behind the scenes stuff and all the different deals cut with everybody. Why it matters now, when you look at it, is that Uzbekistan and Tajikistan used to be part of the Soviet Union. So Afghanistan sat right there on the border of the Soviet Union. That's why the Russians went in the first, but part of why they went in, because it's not like they were traversing through hostile territory to get there. They were going to a place with a favorable government, or a government that was favorable towards them, right? But we arm Massoud. Ultimately, the Soviets leave in '89, and there's initially a 3-year civil war. Like, the civil war never really ends, but it is broken up in parts. Like, there's a 3-year civil war until '92, when Rabbani becomes president of Afghanistan. Before him, I think it was Najibullah. But
yeah, it was Najibullah. Yeah,
yeah.
Sure.
Rabbani becomes president. Ahmad Shah Massoud becomes his defense minister. That's like I said, brilliant tactician, well educated. I think he was educated in France at a point in time. I know he went to a prestigious French Afghan high school in Kabul. That's probably his French education then. Probably why he speaks French too. And he was the defense minister in '92. The Taliban is created in '94, and with the backing of Pakistan, you get a pretty all-out, a legitimate civil war between the North and the South. Well, prior to that, Massoud and his Tajik fighters, just like the Uzbek fighters, just like the Hazara fighters, just like the Sunni fighters, they're all fighting for Kabul, right? Like, Massoud's record is not perfect. And what we're seeing a lot of right now on social media is reveration. Is that a word? Being revered?
Reverence.
There it is. Not an English major. A lot of reverence for Massoud. And I think it's understandable, but he's not perfect. Nobody is perfect. And there are a lot of concerns. Massoud took part in, they call it ethnic fighting. It's not really, though. But like if you got a Tajik army fighting an Uzbek army for a plot of land, it's not like they're killing those guys because they're Uzbeks, right? But that is something that's been used against him, is that, the Hazara slaughter. Like, everybody slaughtered the Hazaras at one point or another. Some because they don't like the Hazaras, like the Taliban. Others because they wanted the ground that the Hazaras are on, like the Uzbeks and the Tajiks.
But Massoud, to be fair, I'm sure the Mongols slaughtered plenty of people when they left their progeny behind in Afghanistan. So I don't know.
Yeah, they're pretty indiscriminate, equal opportunity slaughterers, if ever there were some. Right. But Massoud ultimately gets all these groups aligned together. He creates what is known as the Northern Alliance, which is created in 1996, and as you can tell by the name, it's the northern provinces of Afghanistan. And it's split into two. You got the northeast part, which is mostly Tajik and is ran by Massoud and his fighters. And then the northwest, I guess you could say, which is mostly Uzbek and Turkmen, and that's governed by Dostum and his fighters. And within the Northern Alliance, you also had Shia Hazara commander Karim Khalili, and you had a couple Sunni Pashtun commanders. I think Abdul Qadir, I want to say is his name. Pretty sure that's right. So you had a very unique thing in Afghanistan. You had an alliance of all the major tribes and Sunni and Shia representation that at minimum had agreed to unite against the Taliban starting in '96 and push them out of the government, because by this time the Taliban have gotten into Kabul. They're the government. It's the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance is ultimately like a government in exile, right? So from here, you have like the last civil war before we get into 9/11. See, so the Northern Alliance, just so people are aware, the official name, Islamic National Front for the Salvation of Afghanistan, more
Yeah.
commonly known as the Northern Alliance. That's a long
What a
name,
great name. Yeah.
right?
Love that.
But that's where we get to. So we get to 96, and if you made a little GIF, or as some people incorrectly pronounce GIF, of the territorial swaps in Afghanistan, it's a whole lot of nothingness going on for like 5 years, right? The lines in the sand have pretty much been drawn, and we get to September 9th, 2001. And that is where a lot of shit changes. On September 9th, 2001, in, I want to say, Talakan in Takhar province, Ahmad Shah Massoud agrees to do an interview with Al Jazeera. We later find out that these people are not associated with Al Jazeera. They are, I want to say they were Moroccan. I'm pretty sure they were Moroccan members of Al Qaeda who had pretty much the video camera for the interview was just a giant bomb. They sit down with Massoud, the bomb goes off, and Massoud is assassinated. He dies later that day. And that's really the big turning point, because if September 9th doesn't happen, then September 11th probably doesn't happen. Because, go ahead, Kyle.
No, we've said it before. I mean, I'm anxious to see like why you think September 11th doesn't happen if they don't assassinate Massoud.
Okay, so he has that unifying ability, right? Mm-hmm. So when he died, that unification was gone. You saw some cooperation with the Uzbeks and the Tajiks. That didn't change, and to this day, that really hasn't changed all that much. Like, people keep saying on Twitter that Dosun's going to Panjshir. He's not gone to Panjshir yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if he tried, right? But as of now, it hasn't happened. You still have a Tajik-Uzbek relationship, but the Hazaras basically, they left. They went back to doing their own thing. The Pashtuns went back to doing their own thing. The Northern Alliance crumbled with Massoud's death to an extent, like from a leadership standpoint, because as we've mentioned, the army was like the Afghan army is basically the Northern Alliance, especially in the first like 5 or 6 years. It was just Northern Alliance fighters repatriated into the Afghan National Army. And if the Taliban, or if Al Qaeda conducts 9/11, we go to Afghanistan. Not only do we link up with Dosum, but we're going to link up with Massoud, who is a good field commander, who has the respect of Afghans nationwide, who can lead a push down not only to Kabul, but further south to Kandahar. Massoud was a moderate Muslim who wanted more of a republic type of a government than obviously an Islamic Emirate or a caliphate or anything like that. And you see it with his son now. There's a lot of talk. They want democracy. They want equal rights for everybody. They want protection for ethnic and religious minorities. They want women to be treated the same way that men are treated. And all those things are very enticing to a Western country that is going into Afghanistan knowing that they'll have to get rid of Al Qaeda, but they'll probably also have to get rid of the Taliban. So who can we prop up? Because that's what we do. We prop up people. Who can we prop up who could be a good leader? And Massoud maybe wouldn't have been an effective leader, at least in the South, because they're all Pashtun and they don't fucking care for him. But I think without question, he would have been a good leader. Like, we don't make a lot of good choices every now and then. Like when we did the whole Soviet-Afghan war, we go in, we arm the Mujahideen, they push out the Soviet Union, and then we left, right? Because we were looking at it from the standpoint of the Soviet Union. We weren't looking at it from the standpoint of what about Afghanistan, right? And that's a great critique that that's discussed in the book Charlie Wilson's War. Like we We went there, we did all these things, and then we just stopped fucking caring about the Afghans. We left them with a war-torn country.
Mm.
So we'd already lost any favor that we could possibly have with them there. Well, if we come back and we get it right the next time around, and we're able to, we can push out the Taliban with the Northern Alliance and with Dostum's fighters, then you install a caretaker government led by somebody like Massoud, who can at least show to the Pashtuns that he's going to let them be Pashtun and let them practice their ways so long as they're not harming other people. You have a chance, right, at having some sort of stability in Afghanistan. And that didn't happen.
I mean, on top of that, if you're the Taliban and you're doing predictive analysis, like Massoud is such like a perfect hero figure for people. But on top of that, his the other Northern Alliance people are hated much more by larger sections of the populace. I mean, people in Kabul, despite some of Massoud's involvement in loss of life there. I mean, everyone remembers Hekmatyar and Dostum, rocketing Kabul and killing people.
True.
Whereas Massoud kind of comes out of that entire situation fairly clean in people's memories, at least. And so, your seat of government's going to be Kabul. He's a great choice to put there. And on top of that, I mean, in real life, we didn't prop up Dostum to, become the leader of Afghanistan because he's an asshole warlord, criminal.
There's great reasons not to prop him up. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. He had his section that he could keep under control. And, luckily he didn't seem to really have aspirations to rule more than, Mez in his area where his people are, because there aren't a lot of Uzbeks in other areas of Afghanistan, so
he also flip-flops more than Mitt Romney.
Yeah, and he rapes people with AKs and stuff. So definitely a lot of problems with like the people that would immediately jump out as great leaders. And, for all his faults, Karzai kind of turned out to be a fairly adequate solution that we were able to find, at least for certain parts of his presidency.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a good analysis. I don't see how it stops the terror attacks, but I do see how it could absolutely change post 9/11 Afghanistan. I don't think it stops some hijackers from attacking us. And Massoud had warned us about that months prior, didn't he, to his death?
Yeah, I think he had said something about it. He'd been talking about it for months, and then I believe, if the story is correct, he said something about it like a week prior to him getting killed. Like I think he was in Paris or some shit, and he said something about it. Very well could be right that 9/11 still happens. I look at it so that the whole reason the Taliban, or God, I keep saying that, they're basically the same group, right? The whole reason Al Qaeda takes out Massoud is ultimately a favor to the Taliban, right? It's not to conduct 9/11. So you're absolutely right there. Like they did it because Omar pretty much like, what are you going to do to help us out? And we'll kill the fucking leader of your biggest military rival.
Right.
And so they did
huge
that
for the Taliban. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, huge for. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I thought on the 9/11. So Al Qaeda on top of like wanting to get back at the U.S. They are also trying to prop up this fledgling Islamic emirate state too, which they basically pledge fealty to a lot of times, and they able to freely operate in. So I don't know, maybe that sort of factors into it, like, hey, this great leader is out. If the US does come in and try to install someone, then maybe we'll be okay. And maybe they weren't expecting the full dicking of the U.S. Air Force that they got. Maybe they were expecting more of a CIA-backed coup instead of angry Americans.
Well, it's like when you hear those stories about like when the first U.S. soldiers got down to Helmand and were operating at night, and the Taliban and Al Qaeda were completely unprepared for that. you hear some of the reports like through the years about just Taliban commanders completely terrified of operating at night because their whole thing was like, we can operate in the daytime. What's the matter? And then it turns out we can see when there's no lights on, and that really fucked them up for a couple months.
I got a great story kind of related to that. This is a sidebar. You can get rid of it if you so choose, great editor.
Nope,
but
it's staying in.
working with the SF, they had a guy that they detained, and they were trying to get some information out of him, and they came and questioned him and basically gave him like the police spiel, like, hey, we know it was you that was doing this nefarious stuff or whatever, and we went and we got the proof last night, and we got your guys. And he looked down at his shoes, and he saw that they were muddy, and he said, Americans don't operate when it rains at night, and basically called them on it. It was kind of a badass moment there. But,
nice.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. Fuck that.
Yeah,
guy.
I mean, I get it. Yeah, if you want to cement your relationship with the, Islamic Emirate, a nation who you operate in. I'm talking about Al Qaeda here. Al Qaeda operates freely. Al Qaeda is able to operate freely, but maybe Mullah Omar doesn't really like them there. Then you say, well, I guess, what if we assassinate Massoud? I guess that does strengthen your relationship quite a bit, and then of course it leads down this rabbit hole to where 20 years later, and it's, yeah, I get it, but yeah, I don't necessarily think the Taliban was like super keen to have Al Qaeda just operate in their country, but I don't know if they really had anything to do about it. But I don't know. I wasn't a Taliban leadership at the time. I'm not sure.
At the time? You weren't Mullah Kyle then?
No, I was not. They didn't give me my district governor spot at the time. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it can go either way. I if he's alive and 9/11 still happens, I'm not surprised, right? Knowing what I know now. But I put the two together, and it just seems obvious, right? Because even without him, there was a pretty effective campaign south to the southern part of the country.
But that's because of JMK and Karzai sort of emerging.
Yes. Because of JMK. Karzai had connections.
Karzai made us go
bodyguards.
Get him.
Yeah. JMK, Ismail Khan, dosed them. They made that happen for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely operatives in the South that we used, to take the country back. But I'm going back to 2001. I'm going back to before 2001, and I'm thinking, like, if I'm Mullah Omar, and I could see the future of what 9/11 would bring to the country, I'm not entirely sure that I let Al Qaeda operate in my country.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, nobody can see the future, so whatever. I mean, I just don't think that anyone knew the long-standing repercussions of something like 9/11.
I mean, let's look at
he was almost willing to hand over Osama bin Laden. If Pashtun wasn't so deeply entrenched in their culture, he probably would have.
Yeah,
maybe so.
Planes are scary, man.
And even then, like in that December, they didn't want to surrender him over, but they still wanted to surrender. Right. You know what? Rumsfeld's an idiot for not taking that deal. I mean, hindsight is 2020, but shit, had we taken that deal, maybe things are a lot different.
I think you always take your enemy's surrender.
Absolutely. There's a great article somebody wrote. It's like it wasn't good enough to accept their surrender. We had to win. Well, now we've lost. So
we lost. Yeah. Well, what could have been in that Rick and Morty meme, in and out 20-minute adventure turns into something way worse.
A generation later.
Two generations almost.
Yeah. Well, no, hey, like you're saying, Kyle, like going back to 2001, let's look at the countries that recognized the Taliban government. It was Pakistan and it was the Gulf states.
Sure.
And that was it. Right?
Yeah.
So what, like, did they have much of you always have a choice, right? I get that. But they kind of had to go, yeah, you're bin Laden, you built me a compound where I can run the country from, and you're helping train my fighters. Yeah, you can operate here. Like, you can train here. You can do all this stuff. Like, to an extent, I'm not going to say Mullah Omar had his hands tied, because he didn't have his hands tied, right? But kind of has to. Even outside of Pashtun, he's got like 4 friends in the world, and that's one of them. Like Doc
Yeah.
Holliday in Tombstone. I
Right.
got lots of friends. I don't. Like he didn't have
Yeah.
a lot of friends.
And he's kind of got to do what Pakistan says, considering they're basically just a proxy government. I mean,
Yeah,
in some ways.
I mean, the representatives to the UN for Afghanistan during the Taliban's rule was the Northern Alliance members.
All right. So part 2, we're going to fast forward 20 years because I think we all know what happened, or at least have some sort of an idea. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, we went in, we turned around, focused on Iraq, never put a large enough presence to make a significant impact in the rural communities, and we are now currently evacuating Afghanistan in a rather shit show of a fashion. I think is the nicest way to put it. But going back to last week, when I was on my way home from a little mini vacation and all of Afghanistan had fallen. By then, Kabul was no longer surrounded by the Taliban. The Taliban were in Kabul, and Ghani had fled with or without $169 million. Nope, nobody really knows. He doesn't need any money in Dubai, though, so he'll be fine.
He left his brother. Ugh.
Yeah, who then pledged allegiance to the Taliban. So
Yeah.
that's about par for the course for the Ghani family. Not a spine amongst them. Yeah. Something about going down with your ship, right?
Or he just hates his brother.
That could be possible. But going back last week, and I remember driving home, and I get home, go to bed, I wake up, and I think to myself, what's going on in Panjshir, right? Because there's no way the Taliban have Panjshir. And lo and behold, the Taliban controls 33 out of 34 provinces in Afghanistan. Sometimes they control 32 and a half, depends on what time of day and whose Twitter you're following. But there is one province in Afghanistan that is not even, as of now, contested by the Taliban, and that's Panjshir province. Like we said earlier, it's the home of Ahmad Shah Massoud. You go there and his picture is everywhere. He's got a really nice mausoleum up there outside of Bazarak, which is the capital. Panjshir, if you're following us on Instagram, we posted an aerial flyover of the terrain features from Kabul to Panjshir province. And the entrance to Panjshir from the south is literally 20 feet wide. The entrance to Panjshir from the north is like 25 feet wide. It's tucked away in the Hindu Kush Mountains. It's a natural fortress. And good luck going in there with just light infantry. Taliban could probably take it. They might. They're going to have to use a lot more than just dudes with newly acquired M4s, for sure.
Yeah, you'll need that Air Force you took over. You need those A-29s, buddy. I don't know. You'll need something big because the Soviets couldn't get their tanks in there.
Yeah. Oh, there's. Go ahead, Stu.
I've seen a lot of videos of all the like armored vehicles that they have in Panjshir. I haven't seen any like helicopters or anything. I mean, they probably aren't going to have any like fixed wing aircraft, but they got to have
very
some
hard
helicopters.
Press. I'm pretty sure they have helicopters. It'd be hard pressed for them to get fixed wing in that area. It's got to be all helo supply, right? I mean, it's literally tucked away amongst two mountains. When you look at the south entrance, the cliff sides are just like fucking crags, man. It's like the cliffs of Dover, but in Afghanistan, and there's a road in between them.
When you see in the news or on for the audience, when you see in the news or like on the internet them talking about the Panjshir Valley, that's the entire province. It's a big ass valley, and it's like goes one way, so very solid defense there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of cool guys with great flags.
Yes, the Northern Alliance flag, which is now the Panjshir Resistance flag, is really fucking cool. I think just that simple green, white, and black. I will give them credit for that. They know how to make flags in Afghanistan, because even the Afghan flag is kind of cool, right?
Yeah, maybe the Taliban flag is kind of cool.
It's not uncool. I don't support them, but
cool flags. It's not bad.
Not a bad flag in that country.
So it's like the German uniforms, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good example. The German uniforms
they were nice.
They were nice uniforms. The people who wore them were not nice. Hugo Boss knew what he was doing. So you have the Panjshir resistance, and the Panjshir resistance is being led by Ahmad Massoud. And if you recognize the name, he is the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, born in Panjshir in 1989. He went to Iran when he was 12, when his father was assassinated. He finished his primary schooling in Iran. He proceeded to get a degree in war studies from King's College in London, and then a master's in, I want to say, like international relations or something like that, from the City College of London. And he also spent a year training at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. Uh, he was groomed to assume his father's position as the leader of the Tajiks in the north and the Panjshir resistance, which has really, I would say, it's never gone away. It's very interesting that they're surprisingly not in the news yet. Maybe just because the sudden shock of what's going on in Kabul still has everybody's attention, but eventually we'll slide over to Panjshir. Panjshir has been relatively conflict free for the last 20 years.
Yeah, did we ever? I don't think we ever had a base there.
We did some humanitarian stuff there, like helping with water systems and things like that. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we had any bases. I'll have to check again. I want to say I did read we had some infrastructure there, but not in a military capacity. But if you've ever seen pictures of the Panjshir Valley, and if you were lucky enough as a member of the military to go to Panjshir, it's really fucking beautiful. It's awesome.
Yeah. All I can think about is fishing those streams, man, from the pictures. That'd be fun.
Yeah, the Panjshir River remains unencumbered by blood and violence, so probably some good trout in there.
But Ahmad, man, he's leading the. I guess him and Amrullah Saleh is Saleh still involved? We keep seeing the former vice president Amrullah Saleh, and he keeps saying he's not going to give up to the Taliban, and he fled to Panjshir with Massoud, and they're gonna get this resistance kicked up.
So it sounds like he is involved. There's some conflicting, unverifiable. There's the word. Reports on a schism between the two. I haven't seen anything to support that. Like, you see the video of them together and stuff. They look pretty cordial, right? They look like they're on the same page. So Amrullah Saleh, we could talk about him for a second too. First vice president of Afghanistan. He has declared himself the caretaker president in accordance with the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, which I guess is valid until people start recognizing the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So, sure, we'll call him the president. Born in Bazarak, he was a disciple of Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was ultimately became the chief of the NDS, which is Afghanistan's equivalent of the CIA. You go to his Twitter page. He ends it with "Spies never quit." Little jabby jab throwing at people. He is believed to have a pretty extensive network of contacts. He claims to have known where bin Laden was 4 years before we took him out, which there's no way that we can confirm that he knew that. But they did confirm that he had sources, he had spies in Pakistan and Iran, speaking all these different languages, infiltrating the Taliban and giving information back to him and the NDS. He was a pretty competent and capable NDS leader until there was a 2010 incident where there was a bombing at an event at the one of the jirgas? There was some sort of meeting, I believe, and there was a V-bid that went off. Nobody was killed. I think somebody may have been injured, but they kind of looked at the NDS and said, "You guys dropped the ball on this." So Saleh resigned, which is if by chance the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense is listening to this, is what a good leader does when they fuck up royally. So, you guys can resign anytime you want for this debacle at Kabul airport. He resigns. He gets back into the government later on. He's now became the first vice president. When that ends, he goes back to Panjshir. That's not a real big surprise. What we've noticed, like reading about him and reading about these other Tajiks, is they're pretty capable fighters, right? So there's a lot of people, and I think it's really just wishful thinking, that want this resistance to be uh, not legit. It's a legitimate resistance, but they want the win or the victory to be realistic. And I'm just not sure. They're surrounded right now, right? Like they can have all the political or all the internal will and fight in the world, and they're being led by the son of a legend. Like I think a good and if you think this is overstepping, let me know. But I think like Ahmad Shah Massoud is like if George Washington had died before the Revolutionary War ends. That's kind of what Ahmad Shah Massoud is, right? He is so highly revered and respected, and I think when you see all these Tajiks up in Panjshir saying that they're not going to quit, they're not going to stop resisting, they're going to continue the fight. They always the first thing they do is invoke his name. So I think that fighting spirit's there.
Yeah, yeah. The only issue is that they have zero supply lines, and they're I mean, you're essentially. Luckily, all your guns use the same ammo, so you're gonna resupply yourself from the dead bodies of your enemies. Like there's a time limit. I think.
I think so too, and I think the best they can really hope for, and I don't expect them to take back the country. I mean, but you might be able to negotiate some sort of like Northern Autonomous Zone or something out of it. I don't see a mass resistance against the Taliban, but I can see a free Panjshir, or maybe a free couple northern provinces.
I can see it from the perspective of the Panjshiris, because when you look at the first reported communication to come out of Panjshir after the Taliban takeover was this is the quote, form an inclusive government. Until then, stay out of the valley, which is kind of a cool thing to say. They followed up Ahmad Massoud. His spokesman came out with a more detailed list of what they're wanting. It's an inclusive government. They want decentralized government, which that's the big kicker. That's their push for autonomy, to have a decentralized government, probably something along the lines of regional, where the Uzbeks can run, Balkh and Jowzjan, and the Pashtuns can run Kandahar and Zabul and Uruzgan and Helmand. The Tajis can get Panjshir and Badakhshan and Takhar. Like they're playing for that. I don't think for a second that's going to happen, and I think it's a little too early to trust the Taliban to honor any such agreement that they do make regarding an inclusive government where ethnic and religious minorities have rights and women have the same rights as men. And the Taliban's doing all the right stuff right now in front of the cameras, but like we said last week, let's see what it looks like in 6 months. And I think Massoud and Saleh know that, and so I don't know if they're banking on getting all of that, but I think their big push is going to be for autonomy. And we're seeing that there's reports that they have people from Panjshir have met with the Taliban. There's no they're able to at least leave Bazarak and get down to Kabul and talk to their counterparts in the Islamic Emirate government, or whatever you want to call them. So they are working towards a diplomatic solution. I just ultimately don't see them getting to one, because I do believe Massoud when he says he's not going to surrender. There's a video, and we've talked about it, and we posted it. We don't speak Persian, but it's got English subtitles. But I threw the sound on just so I could hear him and kind of hear his tone and his pace. And he is very charismatic. He is he can draw a crowd, and he can command a room. And he's 32 years old, right? He's the face of this new resistance. He's very impressive for how young he is. And people talk about his inexperience. Like he's inexperienced because he didn't come back to Afghanistan until 2016 after he finished all of his various schooling. But I mean, he knows what the legacy that he's carrying on, and he knows the people that he's representing. Right there, I do believe some of them, when they get on Twitter and say they will fight to the death before they recognize the Taliban government. So he's got a lot of shit on his shoulders, to say the least.
Yep. And so, I mean, time remains what they can pull out of it. And that brings us to another point. And I think probably the third part here is we're going to talk about Afghan Twitter.
I love Afghan Twitter.
is one of the most unsubstantiated sources of reporting of all time. And people will take up stories from Afghan Twitter and run with them. Like you said, we were talking before that we started recording, me and Zach did, and they will just take stories from Afghan Twitter with no verification and with pictures that are like 8 years old and just start saying that's what's happening. And so it's interesting to like filter through Afghan Twitter and try to figure out what's going on there.
So
the world is getting introduced to Afghan math right now too, which is
oh yeah, they are,
which is really interesting. So for those not in the know, Afghans like to exaggerate how well their side is doing, and so when it comes to, and the Taliban did the same thing when it comes to like, hey man, how'd the fight go? It's like, oh, we killed 200 Taliban today, and we slaughtered them and we drove them away. They're done for, and they fought like 3 guys and all 3 guys ran away. Something, it's like it's ridiculous, just over exaggeration to make yourself look more heroic.
So, some of the more notable examples of Afghan math when we were in Kandahar came from the now spokesman for the Afghan government, Zabiullah Mujahid. We, for the longest time, remember, like, we would follow him. There was him. There was the other guy, Mootmean was the other Twitter account.
Momin, Mohmin, wasn't it?
I thought there was a T in there. He's still on Twitter. I saw him yesterday. He's still there.
Okay.
But there's no T at all. It's a bunch of squiggles.
Thanks, Stu. We were, every time we'd get hit with a rocket, you could guarantee about an hour later, Zabiullah Mujahid would hop on Twitter and go, rockets targeting the infidels at CAF. Dozens of casualties confirmed. It was like, you didn't hit anything. I think once they hit the airstrip, right? Like, to the best of my knowledge, I think there was like one ever casualty or like one death from a rocket attack down at CAF, and it was just wrong place at the wrong time type situation. But like, every month or so we get a rocket attack, and every month or so Zabiullah Mujahid would get on there and, oh, we're taking out the infidels, or we're knocking out the crusaders by the dozens. Like, no, you're not, Zabiullah. Thank you.
Like, you woke me up. You woke me up, and like, not gonna lie, like, there were nights when you have like 10 or 11 come in, you'd be like, ooh, that feels close.
I remember that the first night.
Remember that night?
Yeah, I remember that night because we came into work the next day. It was. I remember the first time we had like 11 or 12 rockets come in, and we go into work that morning, like 3 hours later, right? We go into work, and Colonel Leesman is fucking furious. We need to know what's going on. Like, they're shooting them from over there. Like, I don't know. There's not really much we can do about it. Like, they're setting them up, like leaning them up against rocks and shit with a timer, and they're going home. Yeah. Take it up with PTIDs.
It's a cloudy day, so the freaking balloons can't see them.
Yep.
And then, it's coming, and you're just like, well, you just hope they don't get lucky. But the thing is, like, I love that he was like one of our number one sources for just BS information on attacks on CAF. But then, of course, now he's the spokesperson for the entire government.
Well, he's still peddling lies, so it works out. He hasn't changed.
Yeah, he's a politician now. It's not much different.
It is nice to put a face to the name, right? Because there were times where like, this dude's not even real. I'm like, oh fuck, that's Zabiullah Mujahid. I know that name.
I don't think Momin's real. I don't think.
I don't think he is either.
Is Zabiullah verified now?
What's up, Stu?
Oh, did Zabiullah get verified now?
No, he doesn't have a blue check mark yet.
Who knows?
It's the guy they nutsed the other day.
Oh, that was a great meme.
That's always a good one. Got him.
Was he the guy at the press conference that was speaking that really good English though?
No, that was a different spokesperson. It's not Shireen.
I can't remember who that was. So I was like, dang, he can speak English.
They didn't have his name on there, right? But you've got Zabiullah Mujahid, and then you have I want to say his last name was Shireen, because he spoke to somebody from like BBC Australia the other day. Really good English. Not as good of English as that guy next to Zabiullah. That was really fucking good, right? Yeah. But so the Pakistan. Well, the Pakistanis, basically. The Taliban have a Pashto spokesperson, which is Zabiullah Mujahid, and then they have an English spokesperson who I can't remember his first name, but I'm pretty sure his last name is Shireen. Uh, really good at misinformation. And with that, now we're seeing the Panjshir resistance taking part in the misinformation. Actually, it's not even like it's partly them, but it's just people, right? Just like random people. They'll get on Twitter. Their account was created, 4 days ago, like our account was, and like sources telling me that the resistance just captured 800 Taliban. Like, no, they didn't. There's probably not even 800.
Yeah, they'll use an MI-17 photo from like 12 years ago.
Yes.
And they'll be like, this is supplies. Like, no,
there's two pictures floating around Twitter right now of MI-17s, and they are in Panjshir. The problem is they're in Panjshir in 2011 and 2013, respectively. The people, separate from that, now what I've noticed, like if you go on the Afghanistan Reddit, man, they're falling for it too. Like there's a couple supposed ANA commandos who can't post pictures of themselves, and they're just using the same stock photos that everybody else is using. One of them was like, "Oh, I'm up here in Panjshir. Like, prove it. Oh, I'm in a cast. Like, take a picture. If you're posting pictures, you can take pictures. Come on." Like, there's no evidence that these guys are real, right? They're probably just accounts that are ran by people who may or may not be in Panjshir, who are, well, probably not in Panjshir, but who are trying to help support the resistance by making them seem more credible. And you see that with two individuals whose names have popped up, which is Sami Sadat, who is the commander of the 215th Corps, the Maywan Corps. They were doing some pretty good work in Helmand before they just ultimately got overran. You can't do shit about that. But his Twitter, they were posting photo evidence of their missions, and they're putting in good work. But it's a numbers game, right? And they got outnumbered. He was sent up to Kabul like the day before Kabul fell. He was supposed to head up the Kabul security team. Well, he never really got a chance. So now everybody's saying, "Oh, well, Sami Sadat is in Panjshir." How do you know? Well, this guy's an ANA commando. How do you know he's an ANA commando? Well, he says so in his profile. Has he ever shown a picture of himself? Well, he's got his profile picture. Like all these pictures that he posts, I can go on Google and find those same pictures from different accounts and from places that aren't Twitter, right? But now all of a sudden there's another picture that's floating around that's looks like the back end of a armored personnel carrier, and it's like, oh, here's Sami Sadat, and I'm looking at that like, I know what Sami Sadat looks like. If you're on our Instagram, you know what Sami Sadat looks like. He's not in that fucking picture. But then everybody's like, yeah, we're gonna win. Take that, you Pakistani dogs. Send them all to hell and shit like that. It's like, he's not in the fucking picture, right? Habatullah Al-Azai is another one. Like, oh, he's there. Like, he's not up there. There's one person I've seen so far who's probably up there based on photographic evidence, and that's I want to say his name was Hamid Saifi, who was he was an ANA commando who very famously, I guess, was his Humvee hit an IED last year, and the first thing he did was recorded a video. It's like covered in blood, telling the Taliban to try harder next time. It's kind of a cool video, right? Like he's apparently up there. There is an element of Afghan special forces in Panjshir that is verifiable by photos and shit like that. Yeah, like you can see that they're up there. It's just somebody saying there's 20,000. Like there's not 20,000. Well, there could be 7,000. It's probably closer to 3,000 to 5,000.
Honestly, based off
Boomer, Facebook, and Twitter, to be if there was a war going on and Boomer, Facebook, and Twitter like all had accounts, and this is exactly what we're seeing. Like I don't know, you get to see it play out because I mean these people will take any story anybody posts and just run with it. Be like, it's 3 supplies coming from Tajikistan right now, and they're right here. Here's the helicopter. Like 7 years ago. Sure.
Honestly, if you're a commando in Afghanistan right now, Panjshir might be the safest place for you, because tragically the Taliban are trying to execute any commandos that they can find, at least from what we saw of the treatment of those 4 that had already surrendered. It's probably different in different parts of Afghanistan, but
and let's talk about we're going to riff a little bit, right? Because that's what we did on the boardwalk. So let's talk about how the news is kind of reporting what all is going on in Kabul. Like, so now we're to the point where, the Taliban has come out and told Afghans not to try to go to the airport. and to just stay. So they'll probably start pushing back even harder on Afghans who are trying to get out of the country. I still have zero faith that they will honor their statement that there will be no reprisals. Um, and in the midst of all this, I saw a little speech by Rand Paul that really pissed me off. Talking about the issue of Afghan refugees. So people rightly criticized Kamala Harris a couple months ago when she went down to Guatemala and told them, "Don't come here, fix your own country." Rand Paul said the same thing about the Afghans who are trying to leave. I can't verify what day it was. I think it was may have even been a month or two ago. But I fucking watched it. I watched it the other day. Is when I think John Oliver had it on his show. He showed a clip of it. So maybe I'll go back through and see if there's a date on there. But he's telling these Afghans like, "Oh, stay there and fix your country." It's like he must not have ever listened to an intel briefing because every last one of those Afghans that helped us is going to end up with a slit throat or hung by their neck. Right? That's just the utter nonsense. That I used to respect Rand Paul because I liked his dad. His dad kind of helped me realize that war is not a good thing, and for him to come out and say that, like, has no understanding of what it is these people have done, what they have potentially sacrificed to help us out in a 20-year long boondoggle, right? But they helped us out nonetheless. They risked their lives and they risked their families' lives, and that's the response they get. And now they're pretty much fucking stuck in Kabul now because we didn't do this thing backwards, and we didn't take advantage of having airfields in Herat and Mazar-e Sharif and Kandahar and Jalalabad and Kabul. So Kyle, you and I were talking before we hit record. Like, you got some interpreter who was working with coalition forces like in Sangin, which is Taliban hotbed number one if it ever existed. He's got to get to fucking Kabul, and he's got to get his family to Kabul, and he's got to get through those Taliban checkpoints. Yeah, he's not making it.
No way. Especially now the Taliban has, and I just saw they've stopped Afghans from going to the airport. So
yeah,
if you're Afghan, you're not going to Kabul anymore. So yeah, it's bad.
Well, and now like Americans are having a hard time getting through the gates, and there's word that General Donahue, the 82nd commander who's on the ground there, is upset at the Brits and the French because they're making gun runs into Kabul to pull their people and now our people out of safe houses and wherever they can find them. And I just the level of being hamstrung just amazes me. I read a news article and they were talking to, I can't remember if he was the guy commanding the SAS team out there or if he was just one of the SAS commandos for the Brits, the Special Air Services. But they basically said, these are the orders from London. Fuck what they say. I'm not the one doing the paperwork. They can deal with that when we get these guys out of here and to Doha or Kyrgyzstan or whatever fucking country they're going to before they go to England. Let them deal with the paperwork. I think they're talking about the embassy guys. Like, I don't really care, and that's the mindset they should have, right? These guys are going out to get their guys who help them, and you're seeing that all over the place now on, like, I guess veteran Instagram. I don't know what else to call it, but there's like 24 veteran Instagram accounts that are like updating people on them trying to get their friends who are Afghans who help them, trying to get them through the massive crowd if they're not already in Kabul and get on a plane. It's utterly amazing. And at the same time, it's an absolute disaster that our commander on the ground is. And I understand they don't want to expose them to the risk, but at some point, when your guys want to go fight, you gotta let go of the leash and let them do their thing, right? They understand the risk. They were trained to do this shit. Let them go and do this. The Taliban want us gone. The faster we can get our people out, the faster we can fucking leave. The Brits and the French have reported no issues going out into Kabul and getting these guys.
Yep, but I don't know. I can't see the American military letting them off their little leash to go get Americans out. I don't know. It's not a stop go chart. It's not a sexual harassment briefing. So sorry, you're gonna have to stay at the airport.
It's pretty pretty embarrassing. Like we have every right that if General Donahue is telling his counterpart that they're embarrassing us, well, you have every right to be embarrassed if you're not willing to do what needs to be done. And I understand the three of us are not, and we're never combat arms, and would not be the ones being put in that position. But we also understand that people signed up to understand that they'd be put in that position and are willing to be put in that position. So, so it's the 24th of August right now. So by the time this episode comes out, we're going to have 3 days left before the August 31st deadline. And President Biden announced today that we're not going to be extending that deadline. The Taliban announced today that they would not, that if we try to extend past that deadline, that there would be consequences, which I don't know, maybe 5,000 U.S. troops on the ground versus however many Taliban, Haqqani Network, and Al Qaeda fighters are in Kabul. I don't like those odds if I'm an American. And I mean, the Taliban would understand if they did target us that we would probably come back. So it might just be more huffing and puffing, which is par for the course if you've ever seen Zabiullah Mujahid's Twitter account. But maybe we should have started doing this months ago and we wouldn't have to worry about being in this situation now. So it's going to be an interesting next 7 days, that's for sure.
Yeah. Taliban can't do much. So, I mean, they could, and then they open up a whole other can of. The minute one of them shoots an American, man, oof. Ooh.
Oh, we're going to repeat the last 20 years if that happens.
Pretty much, yeah. I think they know that, so we'll see what happens.
All right, folks. Thanks for bearing with us for yet another hour. Hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as we enjoy making it. We've had a couple ideas of what to talk about in the coming weeks, but considering the fast pace in which everything's changing in Afghanistan, we're not gonna marry ourselves to one particular topic or another. So we're just gonna kind of see how this works out, and we'll figure out what we're going to talk about probably a little closer to recording time. So again, thanks for listening to us. We hope to catch you back here next week.